Sex, politics, and religion at the office, the new competitive advantage. Part of the series, Manuso Musing with seasoned mediator trainer Dr. Barbara Manuso. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hey everyone, this is Mac Pierre Louis, attorney, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland, this time from Berlin, Germany.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manuso in Newport, Rhode Island, and Houston, Texas. So I'm just delighted today to have as our titan of mediation, Doug Noll. And Doug and I go way back many, many years, and I've always admired your thought process, your dedication to the peace process, and your background as a mediator and the trainings that you've done are just outstanding. And we're always well recognized within the professional groups. So welcome today, and thank you very much for sharing a book that you had written many years ago. And it is so relevant today that it needed to be brought out and brought to everybody's attention for the opportunity of understanding and learning from it. So, Doug, welcome.
And thank you, Barbara. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about what was your inspiration at the time that you wrote the book, when you wrote the book, and a little bit of overview, because you were way ahead of your time before this was in the media as it is today. So please tell us.
Well, I co-wrote the book with Dr. John Boogaer, who at that time he and I had started a small consulting firm, and we were kicking around a book idea, and he was talking about how a lot of clients were getting frustrated with dealing with diversity. In those days, diversity was being talked about a lot, and trying to build a diverse workforce was sort of on top of everybody's mind. But the problem was that once they had the diversity, there was just a huge amount of conflict arising, because obviously when you have diversity, you have different values and beliefs and different ways of looking at the world. And you have your own entrenched biases that collide and conflict with the biases of other people around you. And it was a real leadership challenge. So we thought that we would write a book for leaders on how to take diversity in sex, politics, and religion and use it for building a competitive advantage in business. And that was the basic thesis of the book.
Well, you certainly addressed that, and it became even more topical with the issues and the things that have been happening in the past, 4 or 5 years now on the Me Too arena. So how have your thoughts changed, or how have you thought of the addressing what you had seen? And what year again was it that this book was first published?
I think 2006, if I recall correctly.
2006. So that's a while ago. That was way ahead of its time, but a necessary book and something that you noted that needed being addressed. So how do you see that this has addressed or still been relevant as it is? What are some of the key parts of it that still resonant today?
Sadly, I don't think anything has changed. I still don't think that we have appropriately diverse workforces that are being led properly. And I think we have, look at the Great Resignation that's occurred over the last 18 months, a direct result of poor leadership. And the advice that we gave in the book about how to manage diversity requires a lot of skill. And I don't think leaders in organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, are actually taking the time to develop the skills they need to properly motivate and manage a diverse workforce. And as a consequence, they've got the same problems that they had 15 or 20 years ago. It's just nothing. I really don't see much change at all. And it's very sad because the tools are out there, but the motivation to lead is not.
And this is why it was so important for us to have you with us and to discuss those topics. Because actually, looking at the title of your book, that seems like the topics that people most commonly touch upon in their everyday lives.
Well, of
And
course.
so, therefore, they're also a part of the mediation process. So they come up there as well. It's not just the office, it's not just the work environment when pieces of those topics can be brought into light. And I would want you to share with us some of those leadership tips or some of the insights into how to handle at least some of these, because what we concentrate on here is the conflict resolution and showing how the titans of mediation do that.
Well, one of our premises was that, and I didn't. Now that I think back on it, maybe that's when I first started getting this idea that that we have, as leaders, we have to understand that human beings are whole beings, and asking them to park their beliefs and emotions and all aspects of them, other than what is relevant for the workforce or the workplace, at the door when they walk in, is beyond stupid, because we're asking them to leave what makes them who they are behind, and we're only bringing a very small part of them into a working environment. Now, if we say, all right, we want a diverse workforce, and we want to have a place where there are a lot of different ideas, many of which will conflict. The leaders of those teams have to be able to do some very specific things that takes training to learn how to do. Number one, they have to provide a psychological anchor for their team members and provide direction, focus, purpose, and safety. And I think when we're talking about diversity and beliefs, especially in the polarized world that we live in today, the leader's most important function is to create emotional safety for the team, so that people are not going to be ridiculed, they're not going to be humiliated, they're not going to be criticized or judged for who they are or what they say, that all ideas are welcome, and more importantly, it's okay to make mistakes. And there isn't a lot of tolerance for that right now, which is, again, why I think a lot of people have resigned. And for a leader to be able to manage that kind of diversity in that way requires that the leader have a high level of emotional competency and be very, very self-aware and be very authentic. And that, again, is something that is in short supply in leadership. Obviously, conflicts arise in the workplace all the time. There's some statistics that say that leaders spend 80% of their time putting out brush fires and conflicts. So it strikes me that one of the essential skills that a leader should develop is how to recognize and manage conflict that is going to inevitably arise between different kinds of people. And yet again, there is no training in this area. The leaders are not getting training in this. They are pretty clueless about it. And many of them aren't willing to get into the messiness of the conflict, into the messy middle. They're just not willing to do it. And so I think that's kind of what I'm seeing these days.
You actually just answered my question before I even asked. Actually, I was going to ask, well, why do you think leaders aren't willing to get into the messiness? Like, is this just a fear people have just as humans, or is it because they're next on the line? Like, what do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of factors. Number one, fear and anxiety, since they are not emotionally competent themselves, for the most part. When they are confronted with emotional situations, they don't know how to handle it. Many leaders rise in the organization because of technical competency, and it's much safer to analyze a spreadsheet than it is to manage a conflict between team members. And business schools completely de-emphasize the human side of an organization. So you're taught quantitative analysis, till you're blue in the face, but you're not taught how to calm an angry person. And so I just think leaders are not inclined to want to get involved in this. They'd much rather delegate all of this to human resources, who as a group are not well equipped for dealing with these problems anyways. And I think that's a huge mistake. I don't think if as a leader you can delegate these kinds of problems. You have to take these problems on yourself and be the person that brings peace to the room, deals with the diverse point of views, and make sure that people feel safe and heard.
And something that I've noted in the office place mediations that I've done is that the managers very often throw their employees under the bus, in a sense, and totally will tell me what the problem is quite clearly. But if they understood it that well, or appears to be, you would think that they would have a framework or a remedy in place themselves to address it. So how would you address that? I find
Well,
this curious because it's summarizing everything you're just saying, but how would you address this?
first of all, there's a big difference between management and leadership.
That's a good
We
point.
manage things and we lead people. Most managers are not leaders, and they are not trained. Yeah, here's a really interesting thing that I've learned, and that is that in the United States Army, if you're a young corporal, 19 or 20 years old, and you want to become a sergeant, before you can do that, you've got to take a month of leadership training before you even qualify for sergeant school. 19 years old, 30 days of intense leadership training in the US Army. For a 19-year-old, how many organizations provide 3 hours of leadership training for their people? And yet they expect their managers to be leaders when they're not. It's just foolish. And this has been perpetuated for generations because companies do not put value on leadership training for even their lowest managers. I mean, the Army says we're an army of one, right? They're teaching their 18-year-olds, privates, to be leaders from day one. And yet in the organizational world, not anything, no effort to develop leaders to speak of. And so people have to learn on their own. Companies kind of expect that if you want to rise in the organization and learn to be a leader, then that means you have to go out and hire your own coach. You got to take your own training. But if you don't know what that training is, and you don't know what kind of a coach to get, and you really don't know what you need, and you don't have a good mentor, then you're basically lost. And to your point, Barbara, a lot of managers become bullies.
Yeah.
They can't. The big shift that a manager or a leader has to make is that performance is no longer measured by my personal output, by what I personally do. My performance is now going to be measured by how the group performs as a whole. And many, many, many people who become responsible for leading groups do not recognize that their role completely changes. They're no longer responsible for production. They're responsible for helping the team produce whatever it is that needs to be produced, to provide the resources, the focus, direction, and safety so the team can function effectively.
And then when we talk about all of that, sex, politics, religion at the office, we talk about topics that really are so controversial to many, can represent so many views at the same time. But I think that what links them is the high emotions when it comes to any discrepancy on these topics. So basically what you are saying in leadership is also managing people in the situation of high emotionality, of the particular members of the team. And these I like bipolarization is very much widely seen, not just within the United States, but worldwide. And these emotions, we are talking about certain concepts. These are intellectual also concepts, and they can heat up people to the extent that they don't control their behaviors. They can become aggressive, they lose temper, they lose very bad language. So how can you, with the experience you already have and the things we'll be talking next in our next episode with you in your next book, which is De-Escalating, we wanted you to tell us also and to share with the viewers, how do you then are being a leader in an environment when people can come to you with so many high emotions, and how do you then deal with these emotions based on sex, politics, religion?
Well, okay, so there are many skills that a leader can master that will help that leader work in highly emotional situations. The worst thing that you can do is run from it, and the second worst thing you can do is tell people to stop being emotional, because the truth is we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. I think leaders have to recognize that this whole myth of rationality that has existed for the last 4,000 years is a big lie. And it's been fed to us by philosophers and theologians because they saw emotions as being bad, as being evil, as being irrational. And once you get past that myth, that lie, and recognize that human beings are emotional, not rational, then when you look at your team as a leader, you're looking at them as emotional beings. And whether they are, there's a conflict over sexual preference or over religious preference or ethnicity or political polarization, you recognize that these are all emotional behaviors. And so you must respond to them at an emotional level. And that's what sophisticated leadership is really all about, is recognizing how all that works. And I think that the other piece of that John and I really try to emphasize is the need for deep respect. And so often we see people who are different than us and we dehumanize them, or we stereotype them, or we have biases against them because they're not like us. And that leads to disrespect and moral disengagement. And I think it's incumbent on leaders to be respectful of everybody and to model the behavior that they want to see reflected in their teams. Again, that takes a high level of maturity to be able to do that.
Yeah, just broadly speaking, based on where we're living today, what you see in the news media, the discussion over what's happening over free speech and Twitter and January 6th, and all these things are big controversies we have in our time. What would be just a few points, just if you just were just asked your opinion based on what you've written and your life experiences, what would be some things you'd say about our modern time?
I've given this a lot of thought, and I would say that we need a new criteria for electing political leaders of whatever party you're affiliated with. I'm no longer going to vote for a candidate who leads me into darkness. I'm not going to vote for a candidate who leads me by fear or by appealing to my base emotions. I'm only going to vote for candidates that lead me to a higher place and make me a better person. And I think that if we all did that, we only voted for the people who would lead us up, not down, we would see a very different political situation in our country. And even if we just started talking about it, do I want to be led down or do I want to be led up? And that's really the choice that I think we have, at least in the United States and probably worldwide. We're seeing the same problems in Europe as well, with the rise of populism and nationalistic tendencies. And all those politicians are doing is pandering to people's base emotions to protect their own power, position, and privilege. And they have no intention of helping people. They have no intention of leading people. All they want are votes, and they'll do it in the cheapest way they can. I'm not. I won't vote. I won't vote for those kinds of people on either side.
Doug, why do you think that that type of emotion resonates with people to start with? I
Well,
find it so curious because a lot of the people that are buying into this stuff 100%, they're educated. Basically, I've always thought of them as nice people. And now I'm just backing away going, why? I just I tell me what your thoughts are on that because
well, I think we trace this problem back to the collapse of our public education system here in the United States, back to the late 1970s and early 1980s, when a number of factors merged together to basically uh, ruin public education. I mean, I'm a law professor too, and I cannot tell you how appalled I am at the writing and critical thinking skills of law students. It's horrible. And this is a direct result of K through 12 failures, where we are not teaching kids how to be critical thinkers. And now the problem is in many parts of this country and also internationally, parents who themselves are not critical thinkers are afraid that they're of the kids becoming critical thinkers. And so they're forcing school boards to burn books, literally, and to avoid perspectives and viewpoints that they don't understand and don't like, and politicians tell them are bad because they can't think their way through the problem. So all you have when you can't think, all you have left is emotion and fear, and so it's just these are fear reactions, and that's a complete failure of our educational system that people can't puzzle through these problems. And I'll say on top of that, many of these issues that we're facing today are extremely complex, and so complex that very smart people are not able to come up with good solutions. How do we expect a person with a high school education, let's say, to be able to ponder the ambiguities and complexities of some of these huge issues when even the best and the brightest struggle with it?
it's true.
Most people don't have the intellectual discipline to try to figure stuff out, so they just fall back on simple beliefs that provide easy answers. And anybody who doesn't agree with me is not part of my tribe, and so I'm going to hate them because it's much easier to hate them and exclude them than it is to try to understand them. And the political group has figured that out, and so they exploit that to the detriment of everybody, but to their own personal benefit in terms of getting elected.
Well, Doug, this has been a wonderful conversation with you. Your book, Sex, Politics, and the Religion at the Office, The New Competitive Advantage, um, is still so relevant and something that every CEO in the country or manager of any level should have a copy of to make them mindful of what they might be deficient in. So I applaud you for having the foresight and the energy to write such a wonderful book. And I do recommend people find out more and see and read your book. So I thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you for being one of our titans of mediation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you so much, Doug. We appreciate you stopping by, and it's a very informative, conversation. And I think that more people need to listen to it. What you said about tribalism is very, very accurate. We go to our corners and we don't dialogue or think through these hard topics this way. So thank you for your insights. All right, guys. With that, until next time.